Let's talk about that, because every year it gets worse. Irregular and wasteful expenditure by the government's departments, provinces and state-owned enterprises continues to rise. The latest figures released by the Auditor-General make for sorry reading. The overall amount shows that irregular spending by government has ballooned to a whopping 62 billion rand. KwaZulu-Natal alone recorded 12 billion rand of that amount, and we'll get reaction from the provincial government later this hour. But first, I want us to go to Cape Town, where in our studios we can now speak to the man who released the report at the heart of all of this, Auditor-General Kimi Makwetu. AG, a very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. So these latest figures from your report, disappointing but not entirely surprising.
No, thank you very much, Temegile. I think they reflect a status of institutions that do not follow their own decisions. You know, many of them decide that they will address last year's irregular expenditure and all sorts of other things that we pick up in their accounting records. When they don't, then the people involved tend to multiply. The transactions involved tend to multiply. And that's why you start seeing figures growing from 51 to 60, because everybody else get emboldened and say that if these can do it with impunity, what stops me from also doing it with impunity?
But why is it
at the heart of it?
Apologies for cutting you off. Why is it then, Auditor General, that every year provinces, government departments make these commitments to do better as far as the record keeping around their financial spend is concerned, but whenever you release a report, the picture is quite clear that it's simply not happening? Why are they failing?
Well, let's use an analogy, Tembegile, when we look at this thing. You know, this scam that has hit many of us who've got bank accounts, and there's some unknown institution that takes 199 rand from you every month. If you don't follow up on those debit orders every month, by the end of the 12th month, you'll end up not having money to buy petrol. That's the logic of this thing, because in essence, what they are doing, they are ignoring the controls that they need to put in place in order to stop the escalation of inappropriate transactions. And that's why many of them, if you look at our report, have now started having financial health troubles, which means that their ability to continue to pay for their obligations in the future has also become threatened. And that is the key issue around it. If you don't put in the controls that prevent abuse from continuing to happen, especially in an area like supply chain, you are bound to run short of money for other things that you are supposed to do.
And your office, of course, has new powers, which, if I recall, kicked in around April of this year, exactly because government departments and SOEs had gone for so long simply going against your advice and recommendations. When are we going to see those new powers begin to bite, and perhaps even see these entities begin to be paid and held to account publicly?
No, I'm happy that you are raising this question, Tembegile, because as you know, the introduction of any new provisions of any law are unlikely to wipe a clean slate in year one of their application. So in our case, we have already started applying these new provisions already 3 months into their approval. We've already taken steps with regards to about 16 auditees that we subjected to these new provisions, where we go into the detail of identifying whether there are material irregularities in their accounts, which means those instances where there is a glaring abuse of the financial systems which lead to financial loss. So it's year one, we have started, but I think what I can report is that the accounting officers of many of those departments where we've picked up material irregularities have been responsive, which I think is a good starting point. There has not been much resistance to those matters. Some of them were explained, but some of them remain to be dealt with even after the report has been issued to them. So I think what we should do as a country, we should say that at least we've now got one of the key instruments that are going to drive this level of accountability, but it's not going to happen in year one. We are going to ramp up the focus in respect of the rest of the auditees that we look at, to the extent that in the 2020 year, we will probably cover around about 70% of the total national budget around these provisions. I think from that period onwards, you're going to start seeing some evidence of actions that need to be taken. Let me hasten to say also that the Audit Office is one of the instruments in the accountability chain. It does not make departmental decisions. If someone is put into a position and they do not possess the requisite competences to manage finances, the Audit Office does not have the power to chase them away. The people who are supposed to chase them away are the leaders of the institution. So over time, if one needs to get this thing sorted out, it's going to have to be a collaboration between these two levels of power, if you like.
But always worth noting, as we applaud those who've received clean audits and rightfully condemn those whose books are not in order, is the fact that a clean audit does not necessarily mean that a government department, a municipality or any other entity is actually doing the best at the delivery of services, nor does a bad audit mean that an entity is failing at delivering services. Is that correct?
Let's look at it from this angle, because sometimes we analyze this thing to paralysis, to a point where we also ourselves who do the analysis never know what the real answer is. Let's just go back to basics. We give an institution 100 million to figure out the delivery of houses in a particular area. All that we are looking at in terms of these conclusions, have they taken care to put in place the necessary internal financial controls to protect this money? Because this money needs to be protected from people inside as well as those that are service providers who are going to bombard you with multiple documents proposing to do this thing for you in a particular way, and they run away with the money without having delivered all that you need. So it's not really about the comparison between whether if you've got a clean audit, you've delivered services. The chances are that if you look well after your environment, your books are found to be clean, you respect the laws that govern financial management, then there's nothing to hide. You really are going to be very unfortunate if you hide the fact that you have delivered those houses. So that is the one aspect to it. But if you've got a disclaimer of an opinion where the auditors themselves are none the wiser when they look at your records, the chances are that you don't even have anything to show for what that money went. So I think the reality here is that we need to start focusing on how are we going to make sure that the money that is public money is being accounted for, is being handled for the things that are desirable as a starting point. Then I think further down the line we'll be able to do those comparisons to say, are these ones who are looking after their money looking after it properly as kind of a malicious objective, or in tandem with looking after the money, are they also doing the things that are required to be done by them? And I think that part of the analysis is something that we must always keep in mind. But I think the starting point here, over the years, if you look at the audit outcomes, there's just been a glaring lack of control over these finances. And I think that's what we need, because the more we spend this money towards the things that we need, the less we need to budget for the same things in future years.
And one of the other things that the departments often say in explaining why they've racked up these billions of rand or millions of rand in irregular expenditure, AG, is that often they have to spend on things that come up rather suddenly, very urgently, that need to have funds allocated. In interactions with departments, have you found that there are cases where officials are now fearful of having to make those urgent financial decisions because they're so hung up on making sure that the particular entity, the department, gets a clean audit?
Let's just take an example. If you think about issues of emergency, I'm sure sitting there you probably know that there was one province that was affected by floods, even for the second time with the tornado. That was KZN. Now one will expect that if you want to restore the condition of the people in that part of the country to where it was prior to the floods, nobody is going to expect you to go through the normal supply chain processes, because the law already provides for those emergencies. So it is not true. Some of them are normally just making an excuse to say that they were emergencies. I mean, if you look at some of the type of these emergencies, some of them, they are emergencies in a multi-year contract. Now, if you think about it, in year one, we can accept that you had an emergency, but why do you also have an emergency in year 2 and year 3? Surely you should have sorted out your planning once you discovered this lack of planning in year 1. These are some of the issues I think that we pick up, because someone will want to ramp up what started off as a 10 million contract in certain places and end up paying a 100 million bill because they keep extending this contract on the same supplier who does not deliver what has been required. That is the crux of the issues that are sitting in irregular expenditure, not the likes of your unforeseen events like floods and those type of things. They are probably the exception because they don't happen every year in every single municipality.
All right, I was quite struck as well in your presentation today, Auditor General, you mentioned that we're seeing an increase in the number of litigation that's been brought against government departments. Who is suing them and what are the main reasons why we're seeing this increase in them being dragged to court?
Well, the bulk of those, for example, you'll find many of them in the health portfolio. I think we've seen quite a number of health departments, particularly in provinces like the Eastern Cape and others, where claims and litigation has been brought to departments, which force them to settle certain claims, for example, which they would not have foreseen, among other things. And of course, that is a payment that has gone, without having received any requisite value against it. So you do have instances like those where there are such claims. But others are also non-adherence to contractual obligations, because if I'm an external service provider and I've got a massive contract on which I must deliver in your particular department or municipality, and you do not adhere to your side of the deal in respect of making it possible for this contract to be delivered, those people are going to lodge claims based on a contractual provision to try and recover that which they lost at your instance.
All right, Auditor General Kimi Makwetu.
So it's a question of, in your carrying out of...
Please do finish your point, sir.
All I was trying to finish off now was that if your systems internally in your department are deficient and you are not able to preventatively control your environment, you are going to become exposed to claims and those types of litigation. And that's actually a disposition of resources without value.
All right, Auditor General Kimi Makwetu speaking to us from our Cape Town studios tonight. Thanks so much for your time. And I have a feeling we'll be having a very similar conversation to the AG, or with the AG at least, around the same time next year. But anyway, we have heard from the Auditor General Kimi Makwetu there that KwaZulu-Natal's irregular expenditure has been flagged as the highest of all 9 provinces. KZN's closing balance sits at about 41.9 billion rand. Let's get reaction from KZN Finance MEC Ravi Pillay. He's